Soon after Italy's unification, the new rulers had to face quite a few economic problems before being able to address social welfare. The first was a big difference in the country's agriculture and technological development. In fact, the south was far more backward than the north. The so-called destra and sinistra storiche, the right and the left-wing parties which alternated in government in the last decades of the 19th century, had to pass several reforms in crucial areas. We will go through these measures chronologically, covering first employment and unemployment, then healthcare and education, finally measures that enhanced women's rights. In 1883, the Sinistra Storica established the Cassa Nazionale, a fund to help workers injured at work. Protective laws for women and children in the workplace were also promoted and protective measures for workers were introduced. In 1890, the Legge Crispi guaranteed social assistance and reduced working day hours, while the Codice Zanardelli recognized the right to strike. From 1903 to 1913, several welfare measures were adopted. The Prime Minister Giovanni Giolitti expanded and perfected the legislation in favor of older, injured, disabled workers, as well as women and child laborers. Despite this progress, unemployment and poverty were still very high, especially in the south, and quite a lot of people still envisaged immigration to European and non-European countries as the only solution to escape from them. In 1999, in the aftermath of World War I, Italy, like many countries that had participated in the war, had to face the difficult conversion from a war economy to a peace economy. In the early 1920s, there were 2 million employed. It was a time of tension, with continuous strikes and demonstrations both by the socialists and revolutionary and the nationalists. The rise of fascism was facilitated by the support of the lower middle class, which claimed its own social space, and by most of the industrial and agrarian upper class, which wanted a greater support against the working class. Mussolini was requested to form a government in 1922 after his march on Rome. In June 10, 1940, Italy joined the war against France and England. War production favored the development of the engineering sector that had the largest companies located in the northwest of the country. Once more it was agriculture, the main pivot of the economic life of the country, that had to pay the cost of the fascist war, since it was against without men to work the land. In 1945, Italy was on its knees both economically and socially. The centrist coalition, Christian Democrats, had to cope with the reconstruction and economic recovery, helped by the financial aid from the US through the Marshall Plan. In 1963, reforms were enacted for the protection of working women. In 1965, a law introducing old age and social pension was promoted. One of the most important laws was that of the 20th May 1970, number 300, best known as the Statute of Workers. This law introduced important and significant changes, both in terms of working conditions and one of the relation between employers, trade unions and workers, with a few provisions for the protection of the latter. Process of development in Italy starting from the country's unification up to date. It all started in 1888 when the Directorate General of Health was instituted. 2 years later, with Crispi's law, hospitals, nursing homes and charities became public bodies. In 1907, with the consolidated health laws, the government valorized hygiene. A system of mutual health, originated from the mutual and societies, was developed. Unluckily, it was highly fragmented and 1/3 of the citizens were excluded from it. Other institutions were created during the fascist period, such as INALE, National Institute for Insurance Against Accident at Work, and ACIS, High Commissioners for Hygiene and Health. A very important point was marked by Art 32 of our Constitution. The Republic protects health as a fundamental right of the individual and collective interest and guarantees free medical care to the indigent. In 1958, the Ministry of Health was instituted. It guaranteed equal treatment to everyone, while in 1968 hospitals were reformed into autonomous bodies with Mariotti's law. In 1999, USL became ASL, and the national health system was organized in a business way. One of the most serious problems in the 19th century in Italy was illiteracy. Politicians had tried to solve it before the country was united in 1861, but they had never succeeded to. The first important legislation to establish a public education system was passed in 1860, and it was proposed by an MP called Gabriele Casati. With this act, the first 2 years of primary school became compulsory. In 1877, the Casati Act was revised and a new act proposed by Michele Coppino was enacted. The rate of illiterate people was still very high, and though Italy was a united nation, in each region people spoke a different dialect, with citizens from the north who couldn't understand those from the south and vice versa. In 1923, the neo-idealist philosopher Giovanni Gentile, Minister of Education under Mussolini dictatorship, proposed a reform of education fit for the fascist system. With the Gentile reform, compulsory education was raised to 14 years and was based on a ladder system. After the first 5 years of primary education, one could choose middle school, which would give further access to liceo and other secondary education, or work training, which was instead to give a quick entry into the workforce. The education system established by Gentile was in place till the end of 1962, where Parliament passed a new education reform. The work training was abolished and all children had to follow a single program, encompassing primary education and middle school until 40 years. From 1962 to the present day, the main structure of the Italian primary and secondary education has remained largely unchanged, even if some modifications have been made. In 1999, the Italian university system switched from the old system, which led to the traditional 5-year degree, to the new system which split the former degree into 2 tracks, a 3-year degree, similar to the bachelor's degree, followed by the 2-year master's degree, renamed Laurea Magistrale in 2007. The general standard of women's rights in Italy is in accordance with what one might expect from a developed country in Western Europe. They are first-rate citizens. They are masters of themselves and enjoy the same rights as men. They have access to all professions and all offices, except for the clergy. However, it has not always been like that. In Italy, traditionally, society was patriarchal. Up until the 20th century, most women were not educated and were not expected to follow any vocation in life other than being a wife and rearing children. In the late 19th century, women were simply accessories to the breadwinner, father or husband. In the Family Code of 1865, women had neither the right to exercise custody over legitimate children nor the right to be admitted to public offices. In the early 20th century, the status of women was still awful. Women's work was hardly recognized as such. The salary of female workers was usually less than half that of male workers. Women's access to high schools and university was allowed only in 1874, although in reality continued to be rejected for much longer. Education, however, did not guarantee access to professions. With World War I, the jobs lost by men called up to the front were occupied by women, especially in factories. After the First World War in 1919, women were able to obtain legal emancipation, but they were granted the right to vote only in 1946. This right was included in the new Republican Constitution of 1948. Feminist movements started to rise, as for the rest of the world, towards the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. Their major achievements were the legalization of divorce and abortion, which were considered illegal up to then. Divorce was legalized in 1970. In 1975, the family law was reformed to remove adultery as a crime, as well as making it so that male and female partners in a marriage were considered equal by the law. The 1975 legal reforms also removed discrimination against children who were not born in wedlock. Abortion was liberalized in 1978, however, in practice it is often difficult to obtain an abortion. In recent years, steps have been taken to address violence against women and domestic violence. Women still face a number of challenges. Although gender roles are not as strict as they used to be, sexual and domestic abuse is quite prevalent. Many women are still expected to stay at home and care for the house and children, instead of earning a salary and becoming a breadwinner. Only 5% of senior managerial positions are held by women, and there are unequal standards for the women who make it into a professional setting.